Finish up in prepared work, but I said that especially with my group, you're not quiet. So the fact that you are like sitting in tombstones, we're going to hopefully be more interactive. And one of the ways I asked Gerard if he had ever heard of the 3 envelopes that every new president should know about. And he hadn't, so let me just tell you, I heard this from 2 of my former bosses, Steve Sample and Bill Binder. A new president was inaugurated at X College. We won't say it's St. John Fisher, of course, but the president is in the room. And his predecessor and he are having coffee privately before the inauguration ceremony. And his predecessor hands the new president 3 envelopes. They're numbered 1, 2, and 3. And he said, well, what am I supposed to do with these? He said, put them in your top desk drawer and you'll know when to use them. And so it went on for several months during that honeymoon, 100 days or whatever, and then there was a crisis with the faculty senate. They didn't get the pay increase that they were asking for, and the new president had to turn that down to meet budgetary issues, and he was not very happy. He was being skewered by the faculty governance committee at the college, and so he didn't know, and one day he opened his drawer and he saw those envelopes that he had forgotten about, and he opens the first one, and it says, blame your predecessor. So he made a little press conference, went to the faculty senate executive committee, and said, you know, we would have had the money if my predecessor hadn't, done so-and-so in that new building, that's your pay raise. And things were going on well, and then about a year later into his presidency, there was a big comeuppance with students. And the students were very unhappy with the president, now not a honeymoon president, and he didn't know what to do, but those envelopes worked the first time. So he pulled it out and it said, blame the faculty. So he blamed the faculty for why they were cutting the French department and modern languages and the history department, etc. And then he had a big crisis his 4th year and didn't know what to do. The alumni were concerned. There was a big branding problem. The athletic teams weren't winning. He just was exacerbated, and one day went back to his office and just happened to open it, and he saw that 3rd envelope he had forgotten about. And he opened it and it says, prepare 3 envelopes.
That's a good one. So to Jenny's point, and then we'll open it up for questions, just a couple of thoughts on advancing in your own career.
Oh, this is great.
And I think one of them is understand how your boss got to however he or she got there and what they do. Because I think that can help with what I said earlier, kind of broadening your own impact and broadening the role that you begin to understand what their priorities are, ways that you can weave your experiences in with them, ways that you might be able to help them to advance their own goals. And in the process of doing that, I think you can help yourself very much. Again, I think that you can't read enough. There's so much that's available. The Chronicle Daily, Inside Higher Ed. If you want to understand finance a little bit, Kubo has a great set of things. If you've had the finance class, many of you in your first class, so you may not have had it, but Dr. Johnstone, I remember offering a very high quality course in higher ed finance. It's a particular discipline, but it helps to understand finance, so you can read about that through Kubo. I often found that when I was overseeing a number of different areas, many of which I didn't have direct experience in, it was helpful to go to a national conference in whatever that field may have been. So I tried to go to a different conference each year in an area that I was responsible for to learn more about what the conversation was going on here. So one year I went to the NCAA meeting, another year I went to a financial aid meeting, third year I went to a marketing and communications meeting, just as a means of kind of expanding my understanding so that the people I worked with who were reporting to me knew that I had interest in their field and had a little bit of an understanding of it. I could at least speak the same language that they did. So look for ways to do that and then get involved in professional organizations as well. I think, again, broadening the scope of your role is possible through a number of things on campus and in the community as well. You can do that sort of thing. And then finally, and I think this is really, Jenny, the most important thing is finding a mentor. somebody that you can talk to who might be in a role that you want to be, somebody who you just have an opportunity to talk to who might be experienced in higher education. It doesn't have to be somebody at the place that you work. It could be, though. And it doesn't have to be a single person, but I think through the years, I've really had the opportunity to benefit from very strong mentorship. And I found myself in the early months of my presidency not really knowing at times who I can trust in my new role, because everybody comes to the interaction somewhat differently when you're the president as opposed to when you're one of their peers and a vice president. So I've had trouble myself just sort of understanding sometimes why people were coming to me and what they were saying. So rather than erring in saying something back and taking them at their word, sometimes I found myself stopping and calling a mentor to just say, this is the situation that I'm in. And that has been very useful to me. The president in Nazareth and I drove down to Alfred State actually for a meeting not long ago, and in the car on the way down and back, I asked him about what has helped him to be successful as he's gone through his presidency. And one of the things that he said is that he has two friends who are presidents of non-competing institutions, but similar institutions. And he said, sometimes I think only presidents can understand the questions that I'm being asked or the experiences that I'm having as a president. So he said, you may want to seek that out. So that's not as much a mentor as it might be kind of a confidant. But I think at certain points in our lives, mentors can really help. So I would say look for mentors, and if you find one, hold on to him or her and really kind of work through that relationship to your benefit, because that's why they'll be there, is really to benefit you by their experiences. So those are a couple of thoughts, Jenny. I don't know if you would add any in your own experience.
Well, I hadn't thought about the first one, but that certainly makes a lot of sense, even if you just interview them, just to learn more about how they got to where they are.
Yeah.
And of course, you know, I've taught career planning for a long time, and there is a philosophy, I can't remember, and it is sort of this, the idea is that we can kind of make our own new circumstances, and it's gone from my head. But sometimes just interviewing someone about who they are and how they got there, what we might call an information interview in the business, can really enlighten you what else you might be able to do, but it also gets a person thinking about how you might fit into their future goals. So kind of tying the first and the last one together, who you work with, your supervisor and your peers. And with mentors, I found they're mostly naturally occurring. They aren't something that you can force, but you don't be afraid to ask someone to serve as a mentor. A cup of coffee once a month or once a quarter. Don't be unnerved by asking anyone. We would take it as a point of pride, I think, if someone asked us to be a mentor. So probably those two, you know, the people helping us to learn along the way they learn along, I think would be good advice.
Yeah, do you have any insights into that?
I'm a firm believer in mentoring, and I had a wonderful anecdote, true story. My third day in Buffalo in 1974, I was grocery shopping, and as a new person, not knowing even where the grocery store was, and as a bachelor, I literally ran into somebody looking at the shelves in Tops Market, and it was Bill Greiner. And instead of yelling at me, he asked who I was, and he was a professor in the law school at the time, and realized how pathetic I must have looked with all the stuff, because I didn't realize at the time Bill was a gourmet cook, and I had all these fast foods, you know, peanut butter. And he invited me over to their home for dinner 2 days later, and for the last 40 years, it was a wonderful mentor relationship. I was telling Jerry that when Bill was president for 13 years, I had the pleasure or problem of living at the house half of the time, because they had a big dog, and my house was too small for the dog to run around in, and they had a fenced yard. And the people who would call on the phone in the private residence, the mayor, the county, it was just unending, thinking that complaining about something. And that was a private number, how they got that. But Bill was always there to help mentor, and it was just an accident. And when he became a mentor to this graduate student, he wasn't the president or the provost, he was just a a professor in the law school who reached out. So people want to, I think, Ginny, be, especially in this profession, want to do that. And you never know, they might become the president, and in my case, he might hold his hand an hour before he died at the Cleveland Clinic. You know, that pays back both ways, right? That you become their life, too.
We all have a common interest in helping students, no matter what level of the organization. This is why we do what we do for a living. And it's called happenstance. I remembered it as you were, because exactly what happened to Dr. Barber, right? Just by happenstance, he runs into Professor Greiner. Take the happenstance things that happen and grow them. We talk about fundraising. Volunteer, we gave you one already. Volunteer to ask your peer group to raise some funds. I had an opportunity when I was at NTRIP, because I was there 20 years. On the weekends and at nights, I was just sharing with some of my students, you could get paid $20 an hour to come in and do academic advising. I needed the money because I was a young professional, and what an experience working with students one-on-one, helping them pick courses. So look at your own campuses for these other ways you can volunteer. We always need help on new student move-in day. Put your t-shirt on and come out and help us. That's how you make things happen, just by being present and being a willing volunteer.
Let me ask if there are any questions about what we talked about so far with the presidency and the role of the president.
What was your search process like? What did you have to go through? Did they go for a national search firm, or because you worked at the institution, did you obtain it more easily?
I didn't. It was actually kind of an awkward time for me as an employee, because when you're an internal candidate, you're really kind of putting yourself in front of everyone to be evaluated, which you should do. But so it was a national search, and I was one of 3 candidates brought to campus for an interview. It was a day-and-a-half interview, including a dinner with the board and with my wife, and then a day of interviews on campus with every constituent group that you might think of. I had the opportunity to visit with the students in the evening before my visit. So it was a full-blown national process. And then I was invited to not be on campus on the days when the 2 other candidates were coming. And it was kind of odd because, you know, when you're at a place for as long as I've been at the institution, I care very much about it, and you can't help but sort of feel at times, you know, sort of defensive, and at other times, you know, optimistic, and other times just wondering like what the outcome is going to be. Because one certainty was when I decided to apply, I was either going to be the president or I was going to be working somewhere else, because no one wants to have somebody working for them who wanted their job, you know, in a search. So I'd seen that before. So it was really the biggest decision for my wife and I was that, you know, putting yourself out there as a candidate with the understanding that it may cause you to leave the job that you really enjoyed. So we hired a search firm who ran through a process, and it was an interesting process. The first one was kind of a normal application process. The second one, as Dr. Barber knows, I was given about 5 pages worth of questions that I had to answer, everything ranging from what my educational philosophy was to what my vision was for the future of the institution, what things I believed about student life. And so Bill was actually very helpful to me. I drafted my answers out and sent them to about 10 people that I knew and respected to ask them in their various ways to read from an area. One of them that he was very helpful with was in my answers about faculty, because again, I'm not a faculty member, and getting the answers right was very important. And I don't mean that to sound like it's contrived. You know, I really wanted to get it right. So Dr. Barber was really able to add great insight into the answers, clarifying my own thinking, and encouraging me to think of other things that I might include in the answer, which I was then able to do. So the value in that for me was then that became kind of a platform from which I could speak when I went through the interview process. But But it was, so the first phase was I was invited to an off-campus interview. We're close to the Wegmans corporate headquarters, and one of our alumnus is a high-ranking guy at Wegmans. So our off-campus interviews, many times they take place at an airport hotel. Ours took place at the Wegmans corporate facilities in Rochester. So I went over there, and I was one of 9 people interviewed, and then out of that 9, 3 were invited to come to campus. It's a little bit of a nerve-wracking process.
Even
Maybe
for
a
the
little bit
vice,
more than a little bit of a nerve-wracking.
even for the vice president's job, I had to do an essay as well. They gave me 4 bullet points that I had to write basically an essay. It was my educational philosophy. It was one on finance, how we're going to afford to pay the bills in the future. My words, not theirs. And then just a little bit about the future of community colleges. So even at my level, they wanted something written.
Oh, but like the comps did.
It was just like the comps. It was.
Shuddering.
And actually, I will ditto on having an editor for anything.
Yeah.
Anybody that you can get to read your stuff and give you insight, it always comes back improved. Don't ever fret. And it is a little bit of an ask for a friend or mentor colleague, so you need to give some lead time. But I wouldn't, there are some things I wouldn't let go. This was one of them, certainly a resume I'd never let go without somebody reading it. Any kind of grant proposal, I mean, I could list them. Use an editor if you can find one. And I would say when you get to the point, I didn't do it, I didn't pay an editor for my dissertation, but I found a friend who read it for free, who had been in language and writing an instructor. So do use people that know you, or be willing to pay for it if it's that important. It's really good advice.
And it means you have to be more thoughtful at an earlier point too, in order to give somebody the benefit of that, and that's not a bad thing.
Agreed.
Because by my nature, I'm a procrastinator. So the one thing I've learned in the first part of the presidency is that you can't procrastinate. Everybody thinks you ought to give them a decision right now. You know, they may have thought about it for a month, but they want your answer in an hour, you know, or a day. And so, but with writing and thinking, it's really, I think, important to give yourself some time and take the time to the benefit of others. Yeah.
Well, and I'd like to think there's just an internal message from the search committee, what's important to the college, or the questions we're asking you. So you, even though I don't advise students to ever apply for a job they're not going to really take, because it is such a laborious process. There is an opportunity, if they had asked you a bunch of questions and you're like, is this really what I'm in for? You could have an opportunity to reflect on whether this is the kind of place you want to work. Because it's hard to get the real inside scoop about a place unless you know somebody who's internally, and they may tell you all the negative side. So you know, it's very hard to know what's really going on at campus. And that's a good way to find out what's going on.
And there is a disadvantage too. I had been in my role for about 20 years, so I was not actively in a job market. And so when you're in any market actively, you're just sharper. So there were some people that I was interviewing against. You know, one guy was a president already, and then another person who had been interviewing in a couple of places. So after I went through the interview process, I thought, oh, geez, I would have answered that a whole lot differently if I But so kind of preparing yourself for the interview using, again, that's something that I didn't think of, was that there's an interview, you know, when you have an hour with a group of 9 people to present everything in answer to their questions, it's not a lot of time. So you really should be giving kind of crisp, you know, and there's practice that's involved in that. So I think sometimes if you're involved in search processes early on and you're looking at a variety of positions, then you're sharper in some ways in that search process than you are if you're somebody sitting around doing the same thing for years.
Another volunteer experience is get on a search committee,
Yeah.
as an example. It can be over the top intimidating the first time you go to an interview and there's 10 people in the room. It can be really intimidating. If you're on search committees long enough, you learn the formula. You also learn the rubric on what they're looking for and how you can exclude yourself with not even knowing. Huge, huge benefit to being on search committees.
One of the things I just figured to follow up on that, Ginny, and maybe you could add something to this, is that a lot of search committees, search firms or something else that maybe we can talk if we have some time again.
Yes.
Those are for-profit corporations and companies, and they're only as good as the candidates they find, and the professional job seekers, and there's a cadre of people who are always looking for college presidencies, are not the ones you want. They're the one, want at my campus, whatever that is, the Jerry Rooney, who is excellent and who isn't looking for a job, as you said. But one of the things that I notice on the search committee, if you get to be a president, is that you have all these unrelated constituent elements. And in some cases, in community college, it could be even representatives from labor unions on the campus. And
Yep.
they don't necessarily have a shared goal of the vision of that institution. But one of the things that I found in the one time that I was interviewing for a chief academic officer position before my mom got sick and I had to take care of her, is that I really enjoyed everyone all day long as one of the two finalists, except when I sat down for 2 hours with the president, and on the airplane home realized I could never work with this person. So that the point of this is that you're actually should be, and that's what my question, did you find, even though you were at the college, that you would be interviewing them to see where they were at in certain things?
Well, with the board in particular, Bill, because one of the big changes in the presidency is that I no longer have a boss on campus.
Right.
But we have a board of 32 people, so they are my boss. You know, they have a chair and a vice chair, but I no longer, pick up the phone, walk over into my boss's office and sit and talk about how things are going. So the constituency that I was really most interested in was the board, because they're the ones that are going to hire and fire you. I mean, right? That's what they do. And so understanding what their expectations were and how realistic I thought their expectations were was one part of that. And then answering their questions with what I would be doing if I were the president, rather than giving them what might be an answer that would help you to get the job. So I tried to speak consistently about what I would do if I were the president, not just giving them an answer to get the job and then doing something different, because I wanted to make sure that I could go back to them and say, I didn't tell you anything differently than this when I was interviewing for the job, so if that makes sense. So I've found that the board, I mean, I probably in the first 100 days, there's not a week that goes by that about 8 individual board members don't call me about 8 different things, all of which they and probably only they are interested in. And yet they represent themselves as a member of the board, and this is something that the college ought to think about, and, blah, blah, blah. So there's a lot of that kind of individual agenda work. One of them, seeing your hand go up, is, Division I athletics. Why don't we move in the direction of Division I athletics? I said, because 15 years ago we decided it wasn't a good idea. So I'm not sure it's a good idea now. That trustee hadn't been around 15 years ago. He's not had the conversation. So managing the board is it's going to take some work, and it's going to take time. And it's something that I come with the experience of having been a liaison to 2 board committees, but not having been, employed by the board. So I would imagine that's kind of like answering the constituents. It's not the government that a public institution would have, but we have a very accomplished set of trustees, all with their own. They're somewhat of a common vision, but they all have their own opinions too. So it's been interesting here.
Who is on the board? How's that determined? Is it your big donors, or what's that?
Yeah, it's a combination of things. So we're a religiously founded institution. We're founded by a Catholic order of priests. We have 2 of the members of that community who are on the board. The rest of the board is pretty much, probably 2/3 are alums, so graduates. And then a third would be probably people in the community who are either involved in major corporations or who are major philanthropic types. So it's probably split 2/3 graduates, a third community, and philanthropic types. The board has a governance committee, and the governance committee is charged with going out and finding new people to join the board. And all boards are really self-perpetuating in a way. People look for people who are like themselves. It's one of the problems with diversification, right? So our board is not terribly diverse, either in gender, nor is it racially or ethnically diverse. So one of the things that I've started to talk to the board is about ways that we can do better here. You know, as an institution, about 60% of our students are female. We have about 4 trustees of 40 potentially who are women. Just from the standpoint of modeling role models for our students and that kind of thing. We need to do better there. So how we do better there is probably by me challenging the board to be better. And since they're my boss, I'm not sure I want to do that. So ways to facilitate that, though, would be to bring in somebody from the Association of Government Boards, as it's called the AGB. They have great literature, a good website if you want to read some current issues about what trustees think about or what they're concerned about. So the AGB might be able to consult and come in and do some workshops on governance, and they might talk about best practices with the board and what the board looks like. I'm hoping that the Middle States visit that we have coming up will identify too and support our own recommendation that we need to diversify the board. You know, so little things like that can be done. But the board is usually depends on the institution, but Bill, you might speak to the public, or Virginia, you might speak to a public board. So ours is not, we don't have to answer to anybody other than ourselves in constituting the board. Fisher has typically had representatives of each of the major employers. So back in the day, Kodak, Xerox, Bausch & Lomb, we would always have a representative of those places. We have a representative of Wegmans today. So major corporations in the area are represented. And that's just good business because you want to be connected to those places. And then, you know, the mix of boards. Philanthropy is a big thing. Person's capacity to give is important.
Do they have to give anything to be on the board?
It depends on the institution. At the University of Rochester, when the president invites you to join the board, he'll tell you that there's $1 million or higher commitment that you know, you'll be expected to meet. So at our place, we're not at that level. We need people as much as anything, you know, to join us. So we have an annual giving expectation of the board, and then we ask the board to help us to find people who can give us money that we can be introduced to as well, solicit ourselves. But we don't have kind of a, you know, a 7-figure or 6-figure expectation of people joining. How would you? How is the board at UB? There's a local board, and then there's a.
Well, we have a UB council
Yeah.
in the State University, but then there's a 15-member board for the State University of New York, except for the community college. That's correct, Jenny? And
Yeah.
those are politically appointed by the governor of the state, so it's not a question of giving. Did you help in Cuomo's campaign, or that's how it works out. But one of the things that I have found, having done consulting with a lot of small college trustees, is that you get them, as you described so beautifully, out of a business. A lot of them are CEOs of small companies or whatever. They have no idea how a college or university should run from when they were 21 years of age, maybe, or a law student. So I have done a lot of consulting with boards just to, what are some of the issues that American have, like diversity and whatever. I did such a good job at Bonaventure. I'm now a member of the Student Life Committee of the board.
That's good.
But that was because the president wanted that cantankerous person to shake up because you can't be always arbitrary and capricious. That happens with a lot of private school boards.
But I happen to think that it would be useful to have a college president on the board. Somebody who is somebody other than my voice saying, you know what, this makes sense, or this is an issue in higher education. So we just have gone through recently with our board and did a competency chart. So we asked them to identify areas of competency that they bring to the board. Finance, law, you know, whatever the case might be, medicine, health. And so we're looking at that, and we put together really a gap analysis to see, to help. So I've put that in so that I don't have to again be the one who says that, you know, this board doesn't have what we need in terms of its representation. But if they can come to that through vehicles that I can cause them to give me the information, then I can report it back to them. So I don't know, it's a work in progress.
So that's the ideal, that you could actually recruit members of your board of trustees that have skills that would be an asset, legal, real estate, banking. For Genesee, ours are all appointed, basically, some from the governor, some from the counties, because we serve 4 counties, and we have a student, but we have 3 farmers. Very big for my region, right? And actually, I'm very proud of our board. They actually function as a board should, in advisory capacity, but they would call the president and say, I think we need a food processing technology program, and we did. Because, wow, you found something that there's no way we would know. So in an ideal setting, you really want these constituents that can help you in areas that might just be outside the college's skill set, that they can help. And something like having an attorney is not a bad thing. We have an attorney on too. Sometimes you just need a quick call. What do you think about this? So they become your allies as well as your biggest supporters.
Well, one of our board members who was a physician brought us the idea of pharmacy. So trustees
Yep.
often in their experience professionally can see needs that you don't see and then marry them up with things that you can do. So that creates opportunity.
If any of us are fortunate enough to get in these leadership roles through the internal track like you did, could you talk about some of the pressures that are maybe more focused on internal candidates? It stands to reason that there were people or are people still on your campus who did not agree with the previous president or think that you're just a continuation or etc. They wanted change and they don't see you as that. Could you talk about some of the pressures that you have either faced or heard and how you react to them or how you dismiss them and believe in your agenda?
Well, I would say you can't dismiss them because you're a human person. So it's, people are talking about you. To them, it might be this object out there, but to you, it's yourself. So there's really a lot of what's said. You have to help yourself not internalize, to realize that they're talking about you as a candidate, maybe not you as a person.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe I'm just sort of generalizing it so that I didn't take it as personal. A lot of times it's because you're inside that you're no good. So you really can't do much about that. There's always wisdom in somebody coming in from the outside, and people's experience from the outside is often viewed as better. So it's part of it's showing yourself as a credible candidate. The other challenge, I think, is overcoming who you've been internally when you get into a new role. So it's getting people to believe and see you in a different role than the one that they knew you in my case, where I had worked for a long time. So what I've tried to do in that regard is to just not be a different person, but maybe behave differently by the things that the new role enabled me to do. So as the president, I can do a lot of things that as a divisional vice president I couldn't do. I can easily go and intermingle with people in different divisions now because it's not viewed as a threat, whereas if you're a divisional vice president, some other divisional vice president might think that you're, what are you doing over here? Or why is that of interest to you? So I can comment about things a little bit more freely in the new role. But so it's, and I haven't, I'm not a successful president at this point. I'm new in the role. So all of these things are things that are my observations. What do you think an internal candidate should do or an internal person could do that would help them to either be viewed as credible or if you get a new job, be successful in a different role in the same place?
I don't know that I had advice on what to do, but the question stemmed from I was a graduate student at Canisius when they were seeking a new president, and they ultimately did hire an internal candidate, and it's no secret that there were some folks on campus that weren't too happy with that and the problems that have persisted since that time are largely being blamed on that. So I don't know that in some ways it's almost as if there are persisting problems on your campus, those would be the ones to fix first, because that I think is where a lot of the discontent stemmed from. The same problems will just continue now that we brought in such and such because he was a part of the problem to begin with, etc.
So I suffer all that same problem because I worked directly for both of the prior 2 presidents. So there are groups of people who would perceive problems that I would be associated with, and that was loud and clear to me in the course of the search process. But nonetheless, I think you believe in yourself, you believe in what you can do, and I don't, the first person that I worked for was, and this is not telling details out of school, but Catherine Keogh was my first boss, and I think if she had never come to Fisher, Fisher would not be what it is today. And unfortunately, she died after about 8 years. And early in her presidency, Catherine did something that to me was very instructive in a way that I would not want to do. And what she did was that she felt that, I think it was almost kind of her feeling that to establish her own credibility, she had to diminish the work of the prior president. So she would say, oh, that was lousy, it was well, it may have been, but that doesn't really need to be said, in my view. Why not celebrate the institution and move forward? No institution is perfect. And as the leader, you're going to leave it hopefully better off than you found it, but certainly with areas that need to be addressed. So I learned from her in that respecting people who have preceded you is very important. Whether you agree with everything that they did or not, or whether it was all successful or not, is not the point. They were the president, and having respect for the presidency is something that I think will bring me more credibility than sort of speaking ill of things, or I didn't agree with that, or I wouldn't have done that. It just seems to me to be, I don't know, not the best way to proceed.
But some of the issues that come to our desk are long-standing, sometimes intractable. We could, you go 10 years on a new computer system, no one likes it, everybody grumps about it, you do the best you can. So whether it's a new or internal, some of these issues that persons before them have been struggling with. So, for me, I think you want to separate what those are. We can only fix what we can fix in the time we have. And we've all had 10-year cycles on projects and programs that it takes. I would like to, though, speak in your favor, because I was at the inauguration, and I would say that you are very well respected by your campus. So maybe yours is a unique one. I think you'll be successful, but just from the speeches, it felt to me like the campus wanted you to be the president, which I thought, for me, it was a very warm feel. I'm like, I'll just say, Ginny Ease. I'm thinking, they love this guy. How nice this is to see and to feel. Because we're all human beings and we're not perfect, and we're only going to do the best by everybody if we can. And I think you said that right at the very beginning. If you do best by people and students, I think the rest comes. I think you're going to be very successful.
I put together a transition team. This is something that has been very helpful for me. So there's a lot that's learned in the search process, to go back to so I took the faculty members who were on the search committee and invited them to join me in a transition team that I have said we'll put a 1-year time frame on it. So we have the 5 faculty members representing each of our 5 schools, and then a series of people from the staff, and the student who was on the search committee is away for the semester, but he was on that team. So what I've tried to do is talk to them about ideas that I have, or things that they think, or what they're hearing. And it's just been a good sounding board for me to bounce ideas off of. And they know me as the person that I was, and they know the role that I'm in now. So I've invited them to help me kind of shape that role, and I found that to be very helpful. So to not go it alone, I think.
I know you've only been on a roll about 100 days or so, but are there 3 things or 3 situations you wish you had taken advantage of prior to becoming president that would have been helpful for you?
That's a great question. I think I don't know how I would have done it, but a better appreciation for, I've taught about faculty governance, so this is the irony of the thing. I've taught about faculty governance, but there's a difference between teaching and practice. And so probably spending more time being mentored in an academic context, it's an area that is very important. Presidents can run into a lot of trouble. On our campus, the faculty are the only ones who collectively have a voice that could basically end the presidency, and that would be an action that would be a vote of no confidence, which I don't know if you're familiar enough with higher education, some of you to know what a vote of no confidence is, but it's when the faculty collectively, or whatever body that has a vote, kind of rise up and say, we've had enough of this. So since that is an eventuality, and often I think presidents can get to that place by not understanding what the rules are or what the culture is or things like that. So, so that's something that I'm trying to do now. It would have been helpful had I started out with a little bit more of that. That's the one that is top of mind right now. There are a lot of other ones, I'm sure, but that's the one that I think is, I guess, probably because I've dealt with it the most in the first couple of months that I've been on this too.
Can you comment on, like, as the president's administrative team? If a new president comes in, you know, what happens to the VPs? Do they stay, or does a new president keep bringing their own people in? What happens there?
Well, we were hiring a couple of years. The way I came to be in my former role is that I had a long-serving colleague who was a graduate of this program, too, Bill O'Connor. So Bill and I drove back and forth across the thruway for about 6 years. We got everything figured out by the end of the 6 years. So. But he left to get a new job in 2012, and the president's retirement was on the horizon. So we knew he was going to retire in a couple of years. So I went out to headhunting firms and asked about hiring a VP for advancement. And people said, oh, you'll never get an advancement VP until you have a new president. I said, well, why is that? And they said, because when the new president comes in, these days, before they show up on campus, now this is in places like ours, they call ahead and they fire the vice president for advancement before they ever start their job. So it's not customary for the cabinets to remain intact. That said, there's not wholesale change except in areas that have to do with revenue, in my observation. So Jackie DiStefano as the CFO really can make an easy transition. The vice president for student affairs can make an easy transition. The provost left. That was a different one. Although for me, the provost is a very important position, so I would have actually thought about, after a period of time, I would have been evaluating the provost whether or not they were accomplishing what I needed them to do. But on the enrollment side and the development side, fundraising, sometimes called institutional advancement, sometimes it's development, that position commonly gets fired in a new presidency. And it's all about trust. And so the new president wants to bring in his or her own person. But you spend a lot of time with them, you travel a lot with them. I mean, you have to have a rapport with them. And so, and then on the enrollment side, because again, we're 90% tuition driven, Misha's 90% more tuition driven, you have to make sure that you have confidence in that area. I wasn't as concerned about that area immediately because that's my background. So I had greater confidence in my own ability to help there if it needed help. But I got started right away trying to hire a development person. But so it depends on the president. When Catherine died, my former boss, my first boss at Fisher, Don Bain became the president. He kept the whole cabinet. That was fortunate for us. You know, we all remained employed. But aside from the provost, everybody in the cabinet is at will. In other words, nobody has tenure. You know, you serve at the pleasure of the president. Does that answer your question?
Can you address one substantive thing and a quick thing, because we're all Buffalonians, we're living here now, and you have the Buffalo Bills summer camp.
We do.
Is that a two-edged sword? Has that been good for the institution? But the more serious question is, you're the president of a private college, in an era of increasing tuitions and costs, and I'm sure a lot of those presidents have some sleepless nights, wondering how the institution will, you know, make the best of these times. But the Bills thing is something where, you know, we've all been to Bills camp over it, and to me it's a wonderful postcard of St. John Fisher that no other college, public or private, has in the region.
Right, it's unique. In fact, I think there are 10 campuses in the country, 12 at most, that today hold NFL training camps on their campus, because a lot of the professional franchises, as they've built these new stadiums, have built these wonderful training facilities that are right on the site of the stadium. So they've gone back and they're not doing camps. So for us, the Bills camp has been terrific institutionally in any number of ways. When I first got to Fisher, we were not really that well known in Buffalo. I used to come over here with our president. We'd ride over and talk to groups of guidance counselors and talk about St. John Fisher. You were here at the time. Fisher was not, we'd come to Buffalo and nobody knew who St. John Fisher College was. We'd go to Syracuse and we would have the same experience. We were well known in Rochester and that was it. So today, if you ask anybody in Buffalo about St. John Fisher, I think most people would know St. John Fisher. And I think a lot of that has to do with the Bills relationship, because in the summer for a month, we get media coverage, the likes of which we couldn't afford. And it all emanates from St. John Fisher, and typically it's pictures of campus, and it talks about what a lovely spot it is. Been on ESPN, all over the place. And so that exposure has been very helpful to us. Does it create some complications on campus at particular times of the year? Absolutely. Because it backs up to when our students are arriving. You're trying to get the Bills out of the dorms, get the students into the dorms, get them all ready. So yeah, it's, does it make a lot of money for the campus? No, it doesn't. It's a break-even operation pretty much. And, but all the contracted services, the Bills use our food service, they live in our halls, we're able to employ people, so it's all good. But it's not a moneymaker, but it's the association that you have with an NFL franchise that there are only a limited number of, and that really has brought credibility to the campus and given us exposure in ways that we wouldn't. It's also profiled the guy who's a graduate of our place, who's now the CEO of the Bills, and he's the president of the Sabres, Russ Brandon. So we're very proud of Russ. He's a kid from Syracuse, grew up, came to Fisher, had a great education, and through an internship got started with the Rochester Red Wings, and then went the baseball route, wound up with the Florida Marlins on a championship team when they won the World Series, used that as a springboard to come to Buffalo, and Fisher fit into his regionalization plans. At the time they were redoing the route, and they needed to get they needed to sell seats, season tickets, but they also needed corporate sponsorship. There wasn't enough here. So his regionalization strategy just happened to overlay our primary service area. So it benefited both organizations. So the value of it, Bill, is that it's a win-win. The other side of it is that Mr. Wilson himself, in the time that the Bills have been at Fisher, personally gave us $4 million. And it was just really because he was a good guy and he appreciated what the college was doing. And so our School of Education proudly bears his name, the Ralph C. Wilson Jr. School of Education. And our Athletic Center recently was renamed about a year and a half ago, the Ralph Wilson Athletic Center. So it's a great partnership, that I'm hoping continues, because I don't want to be the president who lost the Bills relationship. No pressure there, but the Bills do have new owners, But the good news was the Pagulas were on campus last year. Both Terry and Kim were there. They stayed on campus in the dorms. They saw the operations, and they were really well pleased with how things were going. So hopefully that'll continue. Your second question was more what? How would you remind me?
The stresses of being a small private college president.
Well, it's funny. We have a $100 million budget, and about 2/3 of it is payroll, and 90% of it comes from student fees. So what, and I don't know if you're familiar with the demographic situation in Western New York, but between 2009 and 2019, the number of available 18-year-olds graduating from high schools in our region is declining 23%. So we do 80% of our business within 100 miles of campus. So 100 miles of campus is declining 23% in high school graduates. Tuition is the primary driver of our operation. And that keeps me awake at night, thinking about how are we going to continue to capture the number of students that we need. The other thing that keeps me awake are the conversations about debt. So our average graduate graduates after a 4-year degree with $32,000 worth of debt. It's about the annual cost of a year's worth of tuition at our place. So I don't know what Buffalo costs now, maybe $7,000. What's Brockport? 7,000, 6?
I think 7.
7. So we're 32, year 7. Our students are coming out with a year's worth of debt. Now, the debt goes up as the costs of the education go up. People's wages and their living is tied to our ability to give them a raise and keep their wages at a reasonable cost of living, you know, and get them things that they need. The campus has about $15 million worth of deferred maintenance. It looks new, but when you get inside, there are places that are old. We have an aging residential infrastructure in several of our major buildings that something needs to happen with. And on the philanthropy side, people don't like to invest in residence homes. That's something you should take care of yourself. I need to increase the endowment. Our endowment generates $1.5 million a year for financial aid. We spend $32 million a year on financial aid. So getting the endowment to a level where we can generate more funds that either enable us to give more aid, help people keep down debt and afford the college, or to grow the endowment so that we can expand the aid available. You want me to keep going on? There are about 25 things. It's, there's an economic reality that is, that higher education, private higher ed, there's a whole, I can't speak really to public higher ed, because people talk about the increasing costs there, lessening state aid and everything. I don't understand that as well. The private sector, we have basically two sources of revenue. You know, we get money from students or we get it from people. And the people who give it to us are generous donors very often, more than the federal government. So our ability to bring money in has everything to do with the academic programs that we offer, the quality of the experience that our students have, the success that they enjoy once they leave our campus. So our ability to have programs that are vibrant, our ability to articulate the outcomes of an education, all of that is very important. And I don't have control over a lot of that as the president. So I need to make sure that I get the conversation going across the campus. It goes back to that breadth of responsibility, to make sure that you have everybody talking about things that are strategically important. Because at the end of the day, we can't afford to miss on enrollment. We can't afford to miss on fundraising because we're too reliant on that. We don't have the resources otherwise to have that. At the same time, you have to control the cost because you can't send people out and burden them with the debt. Because the $32,000 that I'm reporting to you is just in federal aid that they're eligible for. It's not private loans. It's not what their parents are borrowing. It's not home equity or any of the other things we know people are using. Utica College recently made an announcement, some of you may have read, that they've cut their tuition in half. We don't compete directly with Utica, but we overlap with Utica. So it's prompted questions on our campus about what are we going to do.
Hi. How long do you have this room scheduled?
Till 6:30.
Good. There's a class in here at 6:30. Just okay. Great. Thanks. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you.
We'll be here for the 6:30 class.
Pre-calculus, trigonometry.
We're up to it.
You're up to
Jerry, I'm sorry. So I have no idea what that was. But none of us will be staying for that class.
I'm out of here.
Anyway, so cost, you know, the economics of higher education is a big concern, I think, on the private sector.
Going back to the athletics, and everyone has their own opinion on athletics, whether they're good or bad for universities. As a new president, like, what's your ideal role going forward with athletics at St. John Fisher?
We had, the other night, Cody, the induction ceremony for the Athletic Hall of Fame at St. John Fisher. And we inducted 7 people into the Hall of Fame. One of them posthumously was our director of campus ministry, who was a very active priest in our athletic programs. He went to a lot of stuff and was very supportive of athletics. We inducted a coach who was a 4th grade teacher in a local public school, who was the most successful softball coach the college has ever had. He coached with us for about 20 years. His win-loss ratio is magnificent. 20 of the kids that he coached are coaching now themselves, and the program continues to be vibrant. and we inducted 5 student athletes who graduated ranging from about 2000 to 2006. And when I heard their stories of the impact of athletics on their undergraduate experience, the role that athletics played in helping to shape them as people and in their careers in life, I turned to the guy sitting beside me and said, if you ever need a reason to think about why we're investing in athletics, this night should tell you that. So I think that though athletics is sometimes a lightning rod, and it's, I think you should invest in athletics. I think the problem sometimes with athletic investment is that it takes so much away from everything else. So I don't think that on a Division III campus that's the case. It's different here. It's fundamentally different at the big time places too. But I think the challenge is when I was at a smaller Division I place where I had worked before, it's the percentage of budget that athletics takes that's a requirement of conference affiliation and a number of other things that makes it just untenable. So from a presidential standpoint, I think that our place is best served by Division III, and I think it's best served if there's a balance of investment between athletics and all the other campus-like things that are equally as important to developing people in the ways that are not athletic, whether it's through the arts or whether it's through student activities, whatever the case might be. So it's a matter of equal investment in my mind, but it's not about investing in athletics. I believe very much in investing in campus life, in the student experience, and I think you just need to do that in a balanced way.
Obviously, you have an athletic director. As a president, do you want to have a more hands-on role, or is it kind of now just sit back and come to me if anything goes wrong or you need anything?
The athletic director reports to a vice president, and the vice president reports to me. The NCAA has a big push for presidents to get involved in athletics, and I think that's really kind of a Division I thing. That said, our conference affiliation is the Empire 8. It's a regional cluster of schools with some affiliate members for different sports, and the presidents are very active with the commissioner in that. So I've talked to the commissioner about it because my former boss had a little bit of interest in athletics as a spectator. He didn't really have an interest in it as much strategically from a campus development perspective and everything. I have much more of an interest in it from a campus development, human perspective. And but not every president does, so I think the NCAA saying presidents ought to, athletic directors ought to report to the presidents is kind of crazy. It just assumes everybody is as equally interested as the next person. I don't think they are. So I think you ought to find somebody on a campus who is interested in athletics. If it happens to be the president, great. If it happens to be a vice president, I think it needs to be somebody at a senior level, but I don't think it needs to be the president. But I think the NCAA has made Division I's problems everybody else's problems, including Division III, and I don't think a lot of the things are applicable. You might disagree. I don't know.
No,
You're an
I'm
AD.
with you.
Me too. Yeah, we're Division II and III. You really want the supervisor to be passionate about athletics. Make sure the stories get out. Make sure the students get served. It is certainly strategic for enrollment and retention purposes. And I share with my class, they are retained and graduate at a higher rate than my normal student cohort, so they're good for us.
Ours are too.
Yep.
I think at the same time, Ginny, the research would say that fraternities and athletes are problems in similar ways sometimes. So I
Yes.
think they need to be managed the larger the size that they are as a cohort on your campus.
Agreed.
So you need to have discipline around those areas.
Absolutely. Lots of professional development, lots of seminars, all
Yeah.
required
Yeah.
for molding them to be young men and young women.
The charge I got is that AD at Rockport from our new president was don't embarrass the institution. I mean, that was pretty much
Don't what?
don't embarrass us. Like, not in the news, not in the media. Like, be careful.
Yeah, but don't you think that that's kind of on the other side? How
Yeah.
about we celebrate your accomplishment?
Right on.
True.
Then it's going to happen.
I think the perspective that you can bring to any kind of campus activity would be there's risk in anything. We're dealing with 18 to 20-year-olds.
Right on.
They do things sometimes that aren't smart, but they're not always not well-intentioned. They just sometimes can't get out of their own way. So I think having a teaching mentality about any of the things we do is constructive. I think it helps people.
Jerry,
Bill,
I can't
thanks for
thank
having
you
me.
enough for
Yes, fabulous.
for the